So thank you very much to Minister Žigmanov for setting the stage for our last, but certainly not least, discussion of the day about the fight for human rights in Central and Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans. We were already a bit past our schedule, so I will just introduce the panelists and ask for some assistance removing the podium as they come on stage. So our speakers are Roberta Taveri, who is a senior program officer for Europe and focused on media freedom at Article 19. Áron Demeter, the head of research and communications of Amnesty International Hungary. Mark Taylor, a senior program manager of the Docket initiative, part of the Clooney Foundation for Justice. Milan Filipović, the research director of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, known as YUCOM, and they will be moderated by Paul Helsloot, the director of strategy, research, and political affairs of Amnesty International's office in the Netherlands. So please welcome the panelists on stage, and I will ask for some help to remove this. Thank you.
Where do you want us? You'll take that one?
Yeah, on
this one.
I'll sit here.
Okay.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and after this long day, which started at 9 o'clock in the morning with some very interesting panel discussions, we are really set to make this as informative and to a certain extent, hopefully also motivating, because you all have to go through another day of more panel discussions. Reconstructing the global disorder, that ambitious goal that's the theme of this conference. I think in all of the scenarios that have passed so far in discussions, a vibrant, sustainable, independent and safe civil society, and that includes possibly also a safe media landscape, is an essential ingredient. And at the same time, this civil society in so many countries, including here in Serbia, is targeted and become themselves increasingly under pressure. So we are talking about a group of organizations that are part of any solution towards a society based on rule of law and human rights. And at the same time, the space in which they or we have to operate is becoming smaller and smaller. So today we would like to explore with you what the issues and the problems are, to flesh them out a little bit, but also to find those sparks of hope that can maybe form the building stones to develop new strategies and to tackle the problems that we actually have and to do the tasks that we are supposed to do. So as a starting point, because we are here with four very expert human rights defenders, but from quite different walks of life or different background, I would like to ask all four of you, maybe very briefly, to tell us why, from your organization point of view, it was important for you to participate in this particular panel. Roberta, can I welcome you to be the first one to...
Sure.
Yeah?
Thank you. It was particularly important because, and thank you very much for the invitation, because Article 19 Europe has worked already for a few years on the issue of SLAPs, strategic lawsuits against public participation. We have worked at a wider level in Europe and focused also in a few countries, including Serbia, partnering with both the Media Freedom Rapid Response Consortium, which is composed by 6 organizations at European level, but also as part of the Coalition Against SLAPs in Europe, which comprises over 100 organizations working together to fight SLAPs at European level. So it was particularly important to highlight what is the situation of SLAPs in the region, and to provide our perspective on the findings of our research.
And for anyone who doesn't know what a SLAP is, we're going to go more in depth about it. Milan.
Oh, I'll be a bit shorter. So YUCOM has been a free legal aid provider for the past 26 years, and a number of our clients have been human rights defenders. So most of our success in strategic litigation actually comes from defending those that defend human rights. Okay. So it's only natural that we want to be part of this conversation, especially in terms of SLAPP lawsuits, which are becoming more and more prevalent in our work, and that is the reason why we are here today. Thank you.
Áron, because we will be starting with Serbia, but we will be looking at the broader picture also to other countries. Áron, you're from Hungary.
I am indeed. Thank you and good evening. So why I'm here, I think because next year Hungary, or the Hungarian civil society, will celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Hungarian government's anti-NGO campaign, which includes a number of anti-NGO legislations, smear campaigns, lawsuits, and others as well. So I mean, when it comes to shrinking space and the quality of democracy, which I believe civil society plays a huge part, Hungary has unfortunately become one of the laboratories of this shrinking space and how to crash Dissent within the EU, kind of as a transmission station between Russia and other EU countries. So I think the Hungarian experience is quite broad and also quite useful for other countries to look at and maybe not make the same mistakes.
Thanks. Mark, last but not least.
Thank you for the invitation to participate in the panel, and thank you to the organizers of the conference. It's been an extremely interesting day and a half. I'm here because the Clooney Foundation is a young foundation, and the Docket initiative that I work for, Trial Watch, these are young organizations, so I'm here as much to learn as anything else. But one of the things that we're doing is monitoring trials in Russia, for example, both against journalists as well as against opposition members, and that's something we try to do increasingly globally. So that's what I hope to be able to both learn from this discussion and participate, add what we can.
Great, thanks. This may also help you to think of questions in the last part of this discussions, because that's what we really are hoping for. We wanted to start as to focus on the situation in Serbia, to set the stage in that respect. And I think, Milan, you're perfectly positioned to give us a bit of an overview, as brief as we must be, of course, about what are the main issues, the main challenges that civil society in Serbia are facing at the moment.
So my organization started documenting attacks against human rights defenders 3 years ago because we realized we are overwhelmed with the sheer quantity of information we are receiving, and that we needed to basically analyze all of it in order to see what our future steps will be, where to focus our future advocacy efforts. And over the past 3 years, I think we built up quite a large database, set along different parameters, as well as a really good overview, statistical overview of all the attacks. And what we realized along the way is sometimes the attacks that seem less intrusive could be more effective. So let me give you an example. If there is a physical attack, if someone is in prison, people will react. If someone mentions the slap, people will say, what? What is a slap? No one knows the meaning of that acronym or what stands behind it. Even the judges, as I think Roberta will say a little bit more about that, don't know what slaps are. So slaps are quite effective, and we see that in the proliferation of slaps.
Can you explain, just a starting point, what slaps are? What do they stand for? You said it.
So it's not a physical movement of the hand. It's actually strategic litigation against public participation. In layman terms, someone who's wealthy or well-positioned, influential, is suing you into the ground because he didn't like what you had to say as a journalist or as an activist. Yeah. Those types of lawsuits are not meant to be won. They're meant to for you to lose concentration and focus on what's your primary mission as a journalist or as an activist.
Yeah. So who are behind the slaps? Who are instigating them?
Unfortunately, I have to say a lot of time government ministers, private companies connected with the government. Those are two main culprits right now in Serbia.
And what are the charges? What sort of accusations are behind slaps?
Well, I have to say they're quite broad. They have to do with defamation, basically, in civil litigation cases. And unfortunately, what we've seen in the past few days are verdicts which are quite surprising for us, especially because as part of the training for judges, we actually held some of these trainings on the practice of European Court of Human Rights for judges with the help of Council of Europe. And nowadays we are seeing these verdicts which are quite troubling. So we understand that education alone isn't enough if judges don't have guarantees of judicial independence as well as protection against undue influences, which unfortunately seem to have worked wonders in those cases.
I think this is something that happens a lot in Serbia, I believe. Can you give one, maybe a little bit outrageous sort of example to make sure
Yeah,
what happened, and also not only what the charge is, but also what the impact is on the people charged?
Of course, one good example is an activist from Novi Pazar, Aladin Paučinac, who protested against the misappropriation of funds for COVID-19 at local hospitals. So there was a lot of emotional response by people who have lost their relatives on Facebook, other social media, and the director of the hospital, who used to also be the mayor of Novi Pazar, sued all of them through civil litigation, criminal litigation, for insult. Also, because they were organizing protests, they also had misdemeanor procedures against them. And unfortunately, I have to say, what we've seen in those trials held in both instances in Novi Pazar, from the quality of the education, we fear that those judges were actually fearing that should they educate against the plaintiff, that themselves or their families will lose access to health care at the local level, because they did not accept any of our evidence. We already have 4 constitutional appeals pending in those types of cases. So there you can only imagine if, for example, that local activist didn't have our support, our lawyers coming to Novi Pazar, he would have been in a world of trouble, because recently he got one decision, I think it was a criminal procedure for insult, where his verdict to pay 50,000 dinars were actually converted to 50 days in prison. And there's only one out of dozens.
Yeah. And just a quick, we come back to you, but Roberta, this is not something that's strictly limited to Serbia, not at all. I think your organization has done some research about it. Can you explain a little bit more about the bigger picture?
Sure, yes. Article 19 conducted some research on SLAPs at European level. We looked at the trends across 10 European countries regarding SLAPs in the period between 2010 and 2020. And actually we found many similarities in many, even different countries across Europe, from the west to the east of Europe. There are, as I was saying, the trends are usually the claimants are, as Milan was saying, people who are in a powerful position in society. So they could either be public officials at national or local level, or wealthy people, so businessmen who have actually a lot of wealth and resources to invest in these lawsuits. On the other hand, when you look at the defendants, they are most of the time, actually the majority of the time, and this has also been recorded by the Coalition Against SLAPs in Europe, they are either journalists who are part of media outlets, or even freelancers, so without even an editor behind them who is able to maybe pay for the legal fees, but also human rights activists or environmental activists. Actually, SLAPs as a concept started, let's say, in with regards to environmental activists as such. Then another similarity is also the use of the laws in these cases. Most of the time they refer to defamation laws, but honestly it very much depends on the jurisdiction. There are also either type of laws that are used, privacy laws, GDPR, laws on revealing private information to the public. And it also very much depends on the jurisdiction. In some cases they are, as Milan was saying, civil cases, civil lawsuits. In other cases, actually the process is under criminal law, so that it also includes additional criminal charges to the defendants. These are, let's say, the main trends that we have identified in the research.
Okay, so it's a good summary to say that despite all the national differences and differences in opportunities and in laws that are being used and charges that are being made, that it still happens in almost all countries, isn't it?
It happens in many countries, for sure. I mean, the Coalition Against Lapse in Europe records cases across all over Europe. It really started the process after the assassination of the Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. And when she was assassinated, she was facing 40 libel lawsuits. So as a result of that case, civil society and the journalistic community across Europe has recognized the problem, started to recognize the problem and started to research on it, and asked also for a response by European institutions as well as national institutions.
Yeah, because one can only imagine what the impact is at the individual level or the organizational level. Is there any one of you who could say a little bit more about it? Have you seen it happen? Have you seen how it plays out? What happens to the journalists or the activists that are being prosecuted like this?
So the good thing is that journalists often have support from journalistic associations, activists have support from organizations such as ours, but at the end of the day, it does influence their work in the sense that it creates a layer of auto-censorship, the topics they may not talk about. So that is the problem. But I think they're quite persistent. So far, it doesn't show that much.
The activists are persistent?
Yes, and journalists as well. So I think it's quite good because at the end, they were winning those cases in most of the cases. So it was time and effort and money, but at the end they would win those cases.
And how long does it take before normally to...
It depends, a year per case.
So it takes a lot of time, sleepless nights, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, isn't it?
No, they have lawyers taking care of that. That's not the issue. But still, you can, if you get a verdict where you are convicted for defamation because you did a report of things you learned at a public hearing at the criminal court, which is a nonsensical verdict, then you start to fear what sort of other things they're going to charge you with.
Yeah. Okay. Mark?
Yeah. Just in terms of impact, I mean, my colleagues at Trial Watch, the sister initiative in the foundation, in monitoring the criminalization of dissent in Russia, what we see obviously is kind of the extreme end of that impact, where journalists and opposition figures are jailed, using almost a kind of every new crisis, there's new legislation that's intended to silence activists and dissenters. So whether it was COVID or Ukraine, each time there's, they build on the sort of foreign agents, the slander and defamation law, those kinds of laws actually get added to over time, just to ensure that there's no space for dissent to emerge as in a particular crisis situation when politics changes within Russia.
Okay, let's, because is this the only problem Serbian NGOs face?
Of course not, of course not.
No,
I think
that was like asking for the obvious, but can you elaborate a little bit further to draw the rest of the picture?
Yes, and it's a good thing that Minister of Human Rights and Minority Rights and Social Dialogue is here, and the fact that he emphasized hate speech as a big problem. Although I'd like to add one thing. While social networks and hate speech on social networks is a problem, it's a part of a larger problem, because social networks emulate society as a whole, and especially its highest representatives who often engage in hateful rhetoric. So we have to be careful and also talk about government ministers, about the Prime Minister and the President, who are also engaging in that sort of speech. And while in the past, LGBTI and Roma were the focus of hate speech, nowadays, it seems to me that that sort of hate speech has been reduced, but hate speech is sort of, I would say, redirected towards people with different political persuasions, whether they're opposition people or people from NGOs. So overall, this accumulation of hate speech has grown, because we have tabloid media funded by government which are hyper-producing text containing hate speech. It has almost become normalized, part of an everyday conversation.
So, Okay, so hate speech is like, you say hate speech is done by like prominent people
Yes,
targeting,
yes.
isn't it? How does it relate to the to everything that happens on social media platforms, the bots, like the ordinary people or the anonymous people that may also be targeting the activists?
It's difficult. I mean, it's quite easy to differentiate ordinary people from bot armies because the way you can just click on their Twitter account, you can see what types of posts they're reposting, what they're supporting. But overall, they are effective because they wouldn't be used otherwise. It's an investment of money and time, and obviously it's been done for years now, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think this is something that Áron, in Hungary, you've probably are quite an experienced person in this respect yourself, and at least your colleagues also have done so. Can you make that comparison? How does it work out in Hungary?
I mean, I think the Hungarian government has a bit different of approach with the same goal, pretty much, is that slaps are not so much a thing, though, like, threatening with lawsuits, that happens. But since the Hungarian government owns a large part of the media and owns the entire public media, has enormous amount of money that they can spend on social media, distributing and spreading their messages, but also because they enacted anti-NGO laws which are unclear and obscure enough to pretty much force many people, many players into self-censorship, and to create this chilling effect where, it's better if you're not speaking up. It actually doesn't really need the slaps. So there are other ways to try to crush someone's soul if you are running a piece in your own pro-government media, which now consists more than 500 different media outlets, and the public media, basically saying that someone is a terrorist, a pedophile, or whatever, a traitor. So there are different, and if you are running this story and if you are running these pieces for like 3 days, 3 weeks, I mean, it makes someone's life quite uncomfortable. So I think this is one of the reasons why they took a different approach. And the other one is that there is a difference in a sense that the regular judiciary in Hungary is still probably the last standing institution of the rule of law system in Hungary when it comes to checks on the government. And I think they just don't want to risk it to bring charges and lengthy trials and legal procedures because they can do it like in 3 days in their media. So I think this is a different approach, but I wouldn't say that slaps will not be more prominent in Hungary because it could easily happen, but I think right now they don't really need it.
And can you say something, both of you, actually? How does self-censorship look like in daily life for the two of you?
For me? Or
Yeah, for me.
I hope,
or for your colleagues in civil society in Hungary.
Yeah.
How do you? Yeah.
I think it doesn't necessarily civil society, but it's more journalists / individual activists / teachers, for example, or pretty much anyone who has something to say. For example, during the COVID pandemic, it was nurses and doctors who had horrible conditions, but basically because of the regulation and because of the message of the government, no one was speaking out. It was extremely hard to find a doctor who could actually tell you how horrible the conditions in Hungarian hospitals are. Journalists were actually banned from entering and taking footages in hospitals. So I think the way it works is that you create laws and different kind of legislation that are vague enough so it doesn't like strictly ban something or doesn't strictly criminalize something, but sometimes it also happens. But it's vague enough that there could be a very long, debate about its interpretation. But since people kind of know what the government's intention, which is not to speak out, they will censor themselves. We have a law which is basically a copycat of the Russian propaganda law, which is basically the idea is that it bans the so-called portrayal and promotion of homosexuality, among other instances. No one really knows what portrayal and promotion of homosexuality would mean in public education or in the media, but it bans it. So for-profit companies, teachers, and those that are under the scope of the law, many of them chooses not to talk about the issue, not to air this program, because I don't know whether I can be charged with. And this is how many of these things work. And then, sure, down the line, there is a court decision from Luxembourg or from Strasbourg saying that this is not okay. But 3, 4, 5 years has passed, and many lives has been ruined during that period.
Yeah. Milan, are there press releases your organization would like to send out, or statements you would like to make about any human rights issues that you actually don't do because you say, okay, it's not worth whatever comes out?
We really have no issues with coming out with public statements. The problem is sometimes the events are unfolding on a daily basis, so public statements lose any meaning over time. So you need to carefully choose when you react, how you react. The issue, of course, is also the fact that your reactions will be covered by a few independent media. It will not be covered by the government. That doesn't mean that we don't have any access to the government media. We do have access, but only if we talk about things that are not controversial. So I can talk about Free Legal Aid on daily evening news, Radio Television Serbia, but not about slap lawsuits or smear campaigns or something else. So, and also like to add, if we are learning acronyms this evening, does anyone in the audience know the acronym for threat of a slap? It's a TLAP. Yeah.
Okay. So,
it's an actual acronym. I didn't invent it.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, that's great. A little bit of humor. Okay, Roberta, what is your perspective on this? I mean, your organization works in many countries. You talk to many partners. How do you look at it from a bigger picture? And also, is there anything that could be done against this? Are we developing strategies to counter these problems?
When it comes to self-censorship as a result of slaps,
yeah.
I mean, it's actually a big issue. In many countries, it's one of the first effects, let's say, of a slap. We have heard many testimonies of journalists across Europe who said that maybe they have received, or their media outlet has received, a number of slap lawsuits. And then next time around, their editors actually started to think carefully if a story has to be covered or not. I mean, these are information that are lost. These are ideas, opinions that are completely lost from the public debate when either a journalist himself or herself or a media outlet decides to not cover certain issues. So it's certainly a big problem. The way that it can be tackled is, first of all, to talk about it, especially for those in these platforms, for those who actually advocate for human rights, for media freedom, first of all, and to encourage those who actually self-censor themselves to come out and share their experiences, and to create a sort of network, a solidarity network across journalists, across human rights activists, to be able to stop the self-censorship practices, especially in the world of journalism, but also in the world of civil society.
And at a more at the policy level, because it's such a problem that we see in different sort of decrees, often copied or followed from the Russian example. the pattern is quite clear. Hungary is even part of the European Union. Still, it's allowed to continue.
Still part.
Yeah, are there any initiatives really to try to tackle it maybe at the root and to, I mean, are there any policy discussions going on, any initiatives at the European level to really address it and to make it impossible to abuse also administrative legislation in this sense?
Yes, yes. I mean, the European Union has been active in discussing and proposing an initiative to counter SLAPs. It comprises a directive and a set of recommendations. The recommendations are immediately applicable by all EU member states. The directive is currently being discussed in a trialogue, it's called, so between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council of the European Union. It has to be seen what the final text is. The initial proposal was, if not over-comprehensive, but was addressing some of the key safeguards that civil society was advocating for a long time, well, for a few years. The last text of the Council has been a little weaker in that sense. So it has to be seen what the final text that will be agreed by these institutions will be. And if that can be a model, let's say, for EU member states and also for candidate countries to be able to put in place some safeguards against SLAPs. I have to say that the directive only covers civil cases which have a cross-border aspect. But the recommendations themselves also include the need for a reform of national legislation. So for each EU member states and also candidate countries in the long term, to be able to align their national legislation to counter SLAPs and include some of the safeguards against
Can you
SLAPs.
give 1 or 2 examples of safeguards that could work?
Yes, yes. I mean, one of them is an early dismissal mechanism. So the ability for the defendant to actually make a claim at the very early stages of the court proceedings to the judge, to actually examine the case and assess whether it is founded or not. Obviously, it has to have a public interest component, the case itself, for a SLAP to be considered, for a lawsuit to be considered a SLAP. Another element that can be included is a cap on damages. So, for example, a claimant cannot request more than X amount of money, let's say. And that would help defendants, as we were mentioning before, most of the defendants are actually, they can even be freelancers who have no one behind them. So it would really release the financial stress from them, let's say. There are also other very detailed safeguards, but they are quite related to specific to the laws. Another aspect is also the availability of free legal aid, so to ensure that those who are targeted by SLAPs can actually access, as I said, free legal aid, so support and defense for free. Another aspect, I could go on and on, but...
But it sounds like there are quite practical measures that could be taken that don't sound really overly complicated, but of course they need to be implemented at the national level. Quite a few of the SLAPs, also companies are involved. Yeah. And also in I think the whole hate speech approach, of course, there's also a role for companies, like the big tech companies. Mark, you do quite a bit of work specifically on responsibilities and complicity of companies. What would you say would be could be done in that respect? How can we sort of educate companies?
First of all, the anti-SLAP legislation, free legal aid, these are crucial building blocks. I mean, the whole point for corporations of SLAPs is to take an issue of public debate or an issue of public concern and move it into a private conflict in a court of law. And thereby remove or undermine the public debate about that issue. And we see this repeatedly, and we see it including in jurisdictions like the United States and the UK. And the UK being both those countries with very different legal frameworks, very strong free speech protections in the United States, but nonetheless a history of criminalizing those counter-corporate discourses, including by lawyers. in fact. And in the UK, cases where the transnational aspects that you mentioned have really been evident, where business actors, not just corporations, but also the likes of Prigozhin and Wagner suing journalists in courts in the UK. So yeah, it is definitely a tool that corporations use. And it's something that for activists that are working over the years, this transnational aspect of corporate activity has been matched by transnational activism, and the SLAPS is one way to try to short circuit that, because if you're targeted, it of course makes everybody step back, and there's a real effort to develop those networks of solidarity that are necessary to support somebody targeted by a SLAP, because you're immediately criminalized in one form or another. I'm not going to get into the hate speech aspects, but certainly one of the things that has become evident in the sort of digital space with respect to dissent, and it's not SLAP so much; it's sort of SLAP adjacent. It's part of the suite of tactics used, and that includes. The influence operations that are run through digital media. We heard earlier today about election campaigns, for example, and the ways that those are used. And there's a market for this, and there are businesses that are in this space that are providing these sorts of political technologies that are silencing dissent. And that is in direct contradiction to the human rights responsibilities of those companies. So when you're talking, there are certainly responsibilities for with respect to hate speech, and we know that there's been a big effort by social media companies with respect to moderation of online speech, but we also know that is largely not only failing, but that those companies are cutting back on their investment in online digital content moderation. So there's a whole kind of range of things within the tech space that really need to be addressed. I do think that the fundamental reality needs to be state regulation that protects speech from these kinds of actions. But before we get there, or maybe along the way at the same time, we need to be looking at the direct responsibilities of companies for human rights and for ensuring that their activities are not contributing to targeting activists. Surveillance industry is another one, right? Apps that are...
And if we find a company that is directly involved in, for instance, in a SLAP suit or in, what does your organization, what kind of tools do you have to, what do you do with that type of information? What is the next step?
We're actually not working on exactly those issues that I just described. That's kind of from my experience with responsible business campaigning in a previous job. But we are investigating the role of business actors in and their involvement in international crimes. That's really the focus of the Docket, which is the initiative I work for, is focused on investigating international crimes. And I lead work that looks at the enablers of international crimes, including commercial enablers. And some of those are what you might call the service providers of authoritarianism that we see operating in contexts in Eastern Europe.
So what sort of services, like from...
Everything from the sort of political technologist stuff that I was talking about, influence campaigns in the context of elections, for example. But what you see with some of these actors is that they're offering a full spectrum of services. So everything from managing the finances and ensuring frankly, money laundering, commodity exchange, all of those kinds of core commercial activities, the lawyers and accountants to make all of that happen, troll farms and digital services, all the way over to private security and mercenaries. And the classic example of all of that is Concord, which is the holding company for Wagner mercenary organization. Now, there's others out there, and they're not all doing all of those things, but that kind of business model is something that we encounter in the conflict space, and that has very real relevance for the kinds of problems we're talking about here today.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. We can talk about it longer, but we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like your human rights activists, and of course, they always, I know them, they always have like a positive attitude. So we have a lot of problems, but we also want to look at solutions and how difficult it sometimes is. I think a few positive sort of approaches, like what Article 19 is doing, not only you, but at the European level, that's probably a good example. I would like to check with you any sort of good examples or strategies that have been developed that prove to be working, that you think, okay, that needs to be advertised, that can be replicated elsewhere, that we could build on. You can think a little bit about it, but I'm sure Áron has at least something, because you anyhow.
I do.
And I come back to you anyhow. Áron.
Thank you.
Kick it off.
Thank
Kick
you.
it off.
So the inspiring part is coming up. So I'll talk about research and communication and campaigning, which my team does. And I am a firm believer of value-based research and value-based communication and value-based campaigns. And the reason for that, and it was a very hard awakening for me and my team as well, is that I think civil society in most cases is right. Okay, so we usually know our legal stuff, we usually know what we are talking about, the facts are. I'm not saying we are always right, but I would definitely bet my money on an NGO than any government at the time when it comes to facts. But it doesn't really matter when you are actually trying to encourage people to do something, or you are trying to be persuasive. And this is when values come in, because values are the most constant and solid things in your life. Your political opinion or your opinion on different policies might change. I mean, it's not very typical in my area of Europe, but there is a chance that it could change. You can listen to facts and you can listen to rational. But your core belief system and your values, what you hold dear and what you prioritize over your life, doesn't really change throughout your life. And this is why last year when we did a campaign against the Hungarian government, when the government organized a homophobic and transphobic national referendum in Hungary, this is why we chose to do our campaign and our whole research and communication based on values and not talk about facts in a way that, you know, the government was basically stating that LGBTI people are a threat to children, they are pedophiles, they are coming to the kindergarten to do surgery on the kids, to have a different gender, and you know this. We didn't try to tell that it's a lie. Obviously, it's a lie. But what we did is that from a previous research, we knew that if there is one thing that all Hungarians agree on, is family, and if there is another thing they all agree on, is security. So we decided to do a campaign on both issues, not portraying LGBTI people per se in a campaign, but portraying their family members, their co-workers, their friends, and their families, talking about that they are worried about their loved ones, and they are worried about their co-workers. And this campaign worked really well, that we managed to mobilize 1.7 million people. So the whole referendum was invalid, which was the highest number of invalid votes in Hungary's history. And I'm not saying that we are genius, I'm saying that I think the method is good. And I think you have to have the facts, and you have to have all your research and litigation in place. But when you are actually trying to talk to people, whether you are right or wrong, I think that's nowadays, unfortunately, a secondary question. The first question is whether you can tell your story, whether you can frame this story in a way that is compelling to people. And I think this is where values and values-based research and communication comes in. So my inspiration would be do that. And this is my, I don't know, I cannot get you a message, but if I could, that would be do this in public communication.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine that was quite, you must have had your celebration after that election night.
I mean, it was a strange night because it was on the same day as the general election where the Hungarian government won with a 2/3 majority. So, I mean, we were very happy because of the referendum. We were less happy about the other result. I think we haven't realized for a while, but then a few days later, people started to reach out to us from the LGBTI community and from people whose relatives or family members are part of the community to thank us because they basically said that what this campaign meant is that they feel a bit safer and they feel a bit more hopeful because 1.7 million people turned out to cast an invalid vote, which for them meant that Hungary is probably, the Hungarian people are much better when it comes to human rights and LGBTI rights than their government, which is actually true.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like finally a positive signal. Milan, or have you? I mean, it may be smaller than this because I'm sure in Hungary they have worked quite a few years towards this particular success. Do you have even some spark of hope from your work, which is really motivating?
Of course, we also have to leave time for questions.
Yeah, definitely.
I have to remind you that.
We're going towards that.
So, if I were to pick one example of good practice, I think it would be our ability to gather and respond quite rapidly to the government attempt to introduce a law on internal affairs, for example. Because if you took a look at the number of public statements that we gave in a period of a couple of days, when we were able to boil down all the major issues so that ordinary folks will understand it, and actually take a lot of bad stuff from the law itself. So right now, somewhere in a police depot, there is a sonic cannon collecting, basically dust. The police will not be able to use it against protesters because we took it out of the law. That's like one example of our success.
Yeah.
So, and there are numerous other examples. Sometimes it might feel like we're only doing damage control, because at the end they will do what they want, regardless of what's written on paper, but we should give ourselves more credit than we do.
It's not only damage control, but sometimes you really achieve something.
Some beneficial things, yeah.
It would be great, but I also agree with you, we go to the questions, to analyze even more, when it's a success and when it isn't, and what are the factors that are decisive? I mean, but anyhow, let's not do that.
I can answer. It's a coincidence, chance. It's a flip of a coin, literally.
Yeah. Really?
Flip of a coin.
It's so unpredictable?
Yeah, as our president is, so are our chances of influencing the reality in Serbia.
Okay, then it's really difficult to develop a strategy, isn't it? Yeah, just try. Okay. Yeah, I would like to open the floor if there are people who would like to ask questions. Yes, we have one. It's helpful to state your name, and if it's directed to one of the panelists, please say so.
Okay. Sonja Stojanović-Gajić, member of the board of BCSP. The question is for all our guests. In the current time and preoccupation with war and security, how do you frame your arguments why democracy defenders matter, especially when in what used to be our allies, so to say, consolidated democracies, if such thing ever existed, are also using some of these methods and justified with the arguments of security. I want to relate to the latest EU law on media freedom in France, erasing the caveats on what are the types of crime when the journalists can actually be surveilled, and just putting national security, and then seeing a few days earlier, arrest of investigative journalists discovering the story of cooperation between the French armed forces and Egyptian. So that would be my one question. And the other question, maybe for our representative of Clooney Foundation, is why keep supporting civil society in countries which are autocracies? Because I hear more and more donors coming with an insight from Afghanistan that we should give up ambition of, establishing democracy in a country where there is no political will. People are voting for autocrats. So why bothering keeping the lights on if there is no will and conditions or whatever? Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with
Sure.
the last one?
Sure.
And then we go to...
Sure. I think the short answer is because it's a long struggle. And if you don't assume it's a long struggle, then yes, you might be concerned with a short-termism and results-based approach. But it's a long struggle. I mean, and from our experience of doing this kind of work in conflict and dictatorship, we are always working with people on the ground who are crucial for us to be able to, for example, engage with prosecutors in jurisdictions in Europe to try to trigger universal jurisdiction cases, for example. But not just in Europe, also in Latin America, for example. We filed a case recently in Argentina alleging crimes against humanity in Venezuela through attacks on demonstrators. So this is, we've heard a lot today that has been particularly dark about the way things are going. I think that's accurate, but it just kind of reinforces my sense that we don't really have a choice but to stay, to keep those relationships alive, to as you say, to keep the lights on, and at the risk of parroting the founders of the foundations. They frame their vision for the foundation in terms of waging justice, right? That it's not just about protecting human rights, that it's a little more value-based, right? That justice is a struggle, and like war, frankly, you have to wage justice. So that is, where are you going to do that? Well, you're going to do that in the places where it's needed most.
Yeah, the other question was about how do you frame your messages, knowing that in so many other countries, including very close in Western Europe, similar laws are being passed. How can you even, also as Europe, I suppose, that's also part of the question, how can we even be effective then in advocating for human rights if we don't get our own house in order? Do you want to say something?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a political question. I don't know if I have an answer also to that specifically. I mean, there is no perfect model. Also, when it comes to SLAPs, for example, we don't see any country in Europe who actually has a perfect legislation, a perfect model that we want to replicate in other places. I guess it very much depends on maybe reconnecting to what Áron was saying, what are the values that you would like to advocate for, and then see which institution or which organization actually promotes these values and create an alliance with them. I think that is the best answer I can give to your question.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, because we wanted to end this on a brighter note. So you're making this really challenging. I think we have a choice. We can look at the good examples or we can look at the bad examples. When the American Revolution happened, it was a lone example, a lone beacon of freedom in the world, and people looked up to it. Now we can look at Poland or Hungary and say, oh, things are really, really bad. No, they're not. And if we look through the history of 20th century, I think we are in a pretty good situation in terms of democracy, development, everything else. So we really do need to look on the bright side.
I love you, Guy. I mean, this is a sort of optimism that we should also keep alive, I think. Otherwise, yeah, how can we even continue? Yeah. So thanks for this contribution as well.
It's not easy, but I think one of the challenges is especially that like autocratic forces or governments or whatever we call them are taking away parts of our vocabularies, and security, family, actually values and such. These have become more and more in the area of like autocratic regimes. So if you would look at Poland and Hungary's government speaking, they would pretty much use the same terms. So I think we have this kind of responsibility, but it's really hard, I agree, to try to take back these words. And I think to answer your question, one thing you can do is you can give up on the notion of like speaking to everyone. So you have to decide who you are talking to, because you will not convince everyone that democracy or human rights are really important. I firmly believe that you can convince the majority in most society, but definitely there will be people who just hate the idea. I think then if you know who you are talking to, you have to know the values, which I was talking about, and you try to have to frame your message. If it's security, you have to talk about security. You cannot talk anything else, because that would be shy away from the discussion. But you have to show them what security means for you, whether it means that a woman can safely walk the street at night, whether it means that an LGBTI kid is not bullied in a school. Governments don't talk about security this way. They talk about militarization, they talk about how different ethnic groups or different minorities should behave to be a good citizen. This is how a government talks about security. There is a whole other way you can talk about security, which is actually more closer to people. This is, and my second point, I'll shut up, sorry, is that I think civil society has this responsibility to lead by example, in a sense, that if we are saying that self-censorship and chilling effect and slaps and these things are bad, we actually have to show people and show the society that we are not afraid. So we cannot self-censor ourselves. In Hungary, and I'm solely talking about Hungary, where I will not be put in jail for being here. The worst thing is, someone from the Hungarian embassy is here and taking notes. So if we have to show that like this self-censorship and being silent is not the way to go. And if journalists and NGOs and activists are trying not to speak their mind, that's, I think, sends a very bad message to everyone.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's also a very clear message. Any other questions? Otherwise, I have one last one. I mean, do you feel like, it's quite a struggle, and maybe sometimes also a bit of a lonely struggle, I don't know. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but do you feel like supported enough? What would you need to do it better? Is there any sort of, for this audience, any sort of practical things that you would like to ask to be able to, to be more effective and to do your work as you wanted to do? And this is maybe, on behalf of the Serbian civil society, could you formulate something?
I hope I don't elicit any laughter, but institutional granting.
Institutional granting, it came up this afternoon also?
Of course, that's the way to go, because if we are dealing with a large number of small projects, we are so busy with doing the technical issues that we cannot focus on our actual work, because sometimes we really do need to react in the middle of the night to formulate our common views on particular draft laws. Most of the time, this is not something supported by the project, and it cannot be supported by a project because our government often likes to surprise us especially in the summertime or near New Year's Eve. And yeah, that institutional granting will really be helpful. Hopefully it happens.
So you mean like also core funding, isn't it?
Core funding, yes.
Yeah. So you get a little bit. You can spend a little bit time in getting project funding and focus a little bit on...
Not in paperwork, not red tape.
Less on the so less paperwork, more core funding.
Yeah.
That's the civil society wish list, I think, for many countries, but hopefully there are a few people around that can take it with them, because it needs to be paid for, and then civil society, I think, is brave enough probably and expert enough to play the role that is so crucial in, I think, in our societies and in the future societies. So thank you, thanks a lot, and thank you for staying with us despite the long day and time. Yeah, but we are, at least our part was a little bit in time. So see you outside for a drink. Yeah.